is officially open.
With the first pick, with the second pick,
With the 32nd pick,
the Detroit Lions select, the Jacksonville Jaguars select, the Carolina Panthers select,
the Green Bay Packers select Jordan Love.
Oh my God.
Come
on. I cannot believe it.
One of the best times to draft a quarterback is when you don't need one.
Why didn't you get a wide receiver in a wide receiver rich draft?
Packers window is closed.
NFL Draft Talk, and I'm here joined today by Bill Bart from Draft Professor and trying to make sure I get this right, the Right Way Sports Network draft contributor for both of those, and I appreciate you coming on to talk some NFL draft with me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on tonight, and always look forward to chopping it up about the NFL draft and everything that's going on, especially with you guys up in Green Bay having the draft this year. I'm sure it's probably an exciting time as we start to round the corner into April.
Yeah, definitely an exciting time. The fact that Green Bay, Wisconsin, probably the smallest sports city in any of the major sports, is getting a host an event that is going to have a ridiculous amount of people there for the 3 days. And I know the Fox Valley area is used to events with big crowds, and you have the FAA Air Show and things like that, but this is going to have NFL fans from all over the world here for the draft, and I'm super excited for it. I do plan on making the trek up. I have to clear my brother first. I can't remember if I have yet, but he lives just south of Green Bay, about a half hour south. So I was going to spend a few days there and spend the day there and just try to take it all in. But I was talking with you off air, and I know you mentioned that you were at the draft in Detroit last year. So I do want to ask you about that as well. But before we do jump into that, if you just want to let the viewers kind of know, I mentioned it, but where can they find your work?
Yeah, so you can find all of my work starting over on X at Sparks Scouting. That's where a lot of my work is housed. I am a draft analyst and NFL contributor for the Right Way Sports Network at TWSN.net, covering all 32 teams. Obviously, being a Browns fan, I specialize in Cleveland Browns things, draft, and just the NFL in general. I also am a contributor at the Draft Professor, which you can find us over there on YouTube at the Draft Professor. We have daily draft content over there as well. I go live on Wednesday nights at 8:30 with my colleague Jacob Roach, who writes for the OBR. So we talk all sorts of things there, but yeah, multiple places, but you can always find the home of it is over on X at Spark Scouting.
Awesome. I appreciate you. I've been following you for a little bit now on X, and I appreciate the content that you're putting out. I've been a draft geek for, I can't even remember how long, probably since I was just a little kid. But just, one of the things I enjoy about a platform like X is, even with all of its faults and issues it has, is a big community of people that have differing opinions and thoughts on the NFL draft, and feel like I'm learning a lot more than I ever have just by getting other perspectives on different prospects in the draft. So that's kind of why I kind of started this series this year, just to try to get different opinions and outlooks on this year's draft, and then also talk some Green Bay Packers. But I know
absolutely
you were in Detroit last year for the draft. What was that experience like? Obviously, it's going to be a different setup in Green Bay, as it's going to be on the grounds of Lambeau Field. But what was that experience like?
Yeah, so the cool part about being in Detroit last year for the draft was it was like X, but in a public setting, just a bunch of people who enjoy the NFL draft and are there to support their teams. Just a really friendly environment. It was almost like a Super Bowl level environment with how much hype and buzz there was surrounding it, but also it had its own flair to it. And it was just a really good time and a really enjoyable time. And I recommend anyone, if you ever have a chance to go with it rotating around cities, if it comes to a city near you, I strongly recommend you checking it out, because it's an absolutely fun time. There's all sorts of different things that you can do there, not just draft related. They have a lot of different things, like such as Lombardi Trophy photos, ring photos, things like that get the whole family involved. So it's a family affair. So anytime you get a chance, I recommend going.
Yeah, I definitely do plan on being there this year at Green Bay. And I was a little unsure when they were talking about doing this rotating, because it always was at Radio City Music Hall. There's this famous photo of Aaron Rodgers sitting in the green room while falling in the draft and booing at Donovan McNabb and all that stuff. So I was kind of worried, is it going to take some of that away? But I think it's actually added to the environment and added to the excitement of it when you are going to Detroit, Chicago, Tennessee, Kansas City, Vegas. You go into all those different cities. I think it kind of adds some excitement to it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, it adds a whole layer to it. When it was in Radio City Music Hall, we always get the screenshots of it coming down on the New York City skyline. Like you mentioned, the Aaron Rodgers in the green room, the how far is Brady Quinn going to fall, those kind of old school stories. But I think now with it rotating, you can now get more of the family friendly and kind of grow the game and grow the NFL draft to what it is now on X, where it's a multitude of people. It's not just Todd McShay and Mel Kiper talking about it on ESPN. It's people like you and me who've been draft geeks for a long time are now getting involved with the NFL draft as well.
And I guess jump right into it. I've heard a lot of differing opinions about this year's draft class, especially the first round. I've heard people comment that there's probably only about 12 true first round grade. There's probably only about 7 true first round grade. And then once you get past that, everybody's pretty much the same type of player. What are your thoughts on this year's first round? You kind of gear towards that this is from a pure first round talent grade is probably on one of the down years, or do you think there's more first round grades that most people have?
Yeah, so on my big board right now, I have 19 first-round grades, which is probably on the higher side of things when you compare it to some of the folks. But 19 of those 19, I only have 4 what I call blue chip prospects, which would be a top 10 pick in any year in any draft class, which is significantly lower than it has been in the past. Once you get past those first 19 to about pick 20 to 25, from there to about pick 75, the players are very similarly graded. So it's going to be I call it a Baskin Robbins type of draft, where it's going to be the flavor of the month of the team picking, whether they like a man coverage cornerback, or whether they like a zone cover corner, or they like a pass rusher, or they like a quarterback who's mobile. It's going to be what they prefer, which is going to make for an exciting night once we get to that back half of the first round, because there's going to be names that are going to be called on draft night that people are going to say, I had a top 50 grade on him, but not in the first round, and vice versa. This is a guy that I had a top 10 grade on, but here he is in round 2 in the middle of it. So it's a starter draft. This isn't going to be where you're going to find your superstars. This is where you're going to find the meat and potatoes of your team.
Who are your blue chip guys? You mentioned you have a handful of those. Who are your blue chippers?
So my 4 blue chippers are Travis Hunter, the corner wide receiver from Colorado. I think he's a full-time corner in the NFL with some wide receiver snaps sprinkled in during playoff run, Super Bowl game, if they ever get there, those types of games, high-profile games. My next one is Abdul Carter, the edge rusher from Penn State, Mason Graham, the defensive tackle from Michigan, and my 4th blue chipper is Ashton Jeanty, the running back from Boise State. I think those 4 guys, regardless of the draft class they're in and regardless of positional value, would be a top 10 talent any year, any class.
Well, I know there's couple names you left out of there. I guess there's been a kind of a hot button topic in this year's draft. Typically, you have 4, 5, 6 quarterbacks that people are saying are going to be first round picks, and this year's draft seems to be lacking a little bit. And my kind of hot take, from the more I hear other people's thoughts, it's not really a hot take, is Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, a typical quarterback draft probably wouldn't be first-round picks, but they're probably going to be top 10 picks just because they're quarterbacks. Is that kind of a fair assessment there?
I think that's a fair assessment. That wouldn't be mine. I think they would still be first-round quarterbacks regardless of this class, just because last year, and it gets thrown out a lot, last year they would have been QB4, QB5. But when you look at that class, you had Caleb Williams, who was quote-unquote generational. Jaden Daniels was that Joe Burrow type of riser. Drake May was really toolsy, had shown a lot of flashes at North Carolina. JJ McCarthy has the huge arm that teams fall in love with. So for me, both of the quarterbacks this year, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, are first-round graded talents. They're 2 of that 19 that I talked about. Cam Ward sits 8th on my big board, and Shedeur Sanders sits 14th. So they're right in there in that top 15 range. It's always fun when you talk about a quarterback class. I think this year's class, outside of those 2, it's going to be a lot of kind of toolsy traits guys that teams are going to say, I can fix him. Jalen Milroe, for example, has a really strong arm, really good wheels athletically, but his accuracy and his mechanics and his footwork need some serious refinement. Jackson Dart, a really good arm, very athletic in the RPO game, but the offense he ran at Ole Miss was a single read RPO, veer shoot offense. Can he command a true NFL style offense? His post snap processing, there were a lot of balls that were thrown into double and triple coverage that shouldn't have been, him just trying to force things. So NFL teams are going to see those guys and say, I can fix them. My take is on draft night, I would only have 2 quarterbacks go in the first round, but there's going to be a third one somewhere. Somebody at the tail end of round 1 is going to convince themselves, hey, I can fix one of these guys if I get a 5th-year option, and they're going to trade back into round 1. And you're going to see somebody at the bottom half of that first round say, I'll trade down and take an extra second or an extra third or an extra fourth just to slide down a few picks. But I think this year's class as a whole is down from last year's class significantly, because last year's class we had 6 guys in the top 13, whereas this year we'll probably have 2 inside the top 9, and then after that we'll be lucky to see another one on Thursday night.
Where do you see Ward and Sanders going? I said you probably 2 in the top 9. Who do you see taking a chance on those 2?
So for Ward, I think he's going to be the number 1 overall pick. I think when you look at the teams picking at the top of the draft, Tennessee, they have Will Levis that I'm not entirely convinced Brian Callahan is sold on Levis. So I could see Tennessee selecting Ward. I could also see them going Sanders. Yeah. I could see that. Obviously, Cleveland at 2. We have Kenny Pickett and Deshaun Watson, who's on the PUP list, and I don't see him returning to Cleveland football. So they're in need of a quarterback. I could see a scenario where it's 1-2 at quarterback. I know some folks are not as high as Shedeur Sanders fans as I am, but you go further down the list. You've got the Giants at 3 in major need of a quarterback. You have the Raiders at 6, even though they just signed and traded for Geno Smith. Geno Smith's also up there in years, so they could get a guy to sit behind him for a couple of years. You have the Jets at 7 with Justin Fields, same thing, veteran bridge type of quarterback. And then the Saints at 9, same thing, even though they have Derek Carr. One of the best ways for them to get out of cap purgatory, just like the Browns, is to hit on a young, cost-controlled rookie quarterback. So I think ultimately, they're both going to go inside the top 10. I think 9 is the floor for both of these quarterbacks. I don't see them sliding out of the top 10.
I'm going to switch gears. As I mentioned, and everyone who watches the show regularly knows I'm Packer fan, Wisconsin sports fan through and through. You can look at my background here and you see some of my memorabilia. When I look at the Packers, I see a team that could use another wide receiver or 2, could use some defensive line help. They lost T.J. Slayton. Kenny Clark had a down year. Their edge guys didn't get to the quarterback enough. And then there's Jair Alexander issue, where we don't know if he's going to be back or not. Plus, he's often hurt. And Hobbs, who they signed as a free agent, is another guy who is often hurt as well. So what are your – so that's me on who I feel they need a lot of help addressing those areas. From an outsider looking in, what areas do you think the Packers need to hit on if you're going to say they have a good draft position?
Yeah, I think the big needs that they need to hit on is along the defensive line, either at edge or defensive tackle or both, realistically. I think they could use probably one of each position. Corner's another one, like you talked about. What are they going to do with Jair Alexander? Are they going to have him play out, or are they going to have him, re-sign? What's the position there? I think that's a conversation. Wide receiver is another one. Obviously, they're not going to go wide receiver in the first round. They haven't done it in 20 years, and I don't see this year being the year they break it.
I want to see,
but yeah.
So I think it's illegal to take a receiver first round in Green Bay.
Yeah. The year the draft happens in Green Bay is the year the streak breaks. That would be must-see TV. But I think defensive line, corner, wide receiver, there's other sneaky needs. Obviously, backup quarterback as a conversation. Do you trust Sean Clifford and Malik Willis? Do you want to get another rookie behind Jordan Love? What's that look like? Running back's another sneaky one. Do you trust Marshawn Lloyd behind Josh Jacobs? Or are you okay with that? With this class being so deep at running back, I wouldn't fault them for taking one this year with how deep it goes. But I think the biggest needs are defensive line, corner, wide receiver are your big 3 that you've got to address heading into before you get to day 3.
Who do you currently have Packers taking around 1 in your most recent mock?
Yeah, so in my most recent mock, let me actually pull that up here so that way we have it, because I just did one the other day. So in my most recent mock, I actually had them going with Nick Scourton, the edge from Texas A&M, and it's a little bit of a fall for him because I have him as my 5th overall prospect. Now, there's people that aren't sold on him because of his Texas A&M tape. He didn't look as athletic as he should, didn't look as great as he did. But when you go back to his tape while he was at Purdue, this is a multi-sack year guy, a very physical edge type of guy, good power and aggression when attacking the point. He's a very thoughtful pass rusher. This is a guy that's no wasted motion. He's going to make the move that he needs to make as a pass rusher to get home. When he was at Purdue, he led the Big Ten in sacks. Last year at Texas A&M, he played with a lot of bad weight, played north of 280 pounds, which that was for all of the Texas A&M linemen. Came in right now 6'3", 257. So this is a guy who's shown he has the ability to rush the passer. He's shown he has the skill set to do it. And I think playing at that lighter weight, he's going to be a little more athletic, a little more flexible. So he's my 5th overall prospect, but obviously Green Bay ended up with him at 23, which would be absolutely excellent value for Green Bay there.
Hit my wrong button. I meant to hit my mute mic and I removed from the screen. I didn't mean to scare you there for a minute. So you said you were having issues earlier. So
yeah,
a name I've seen mocked to Green Bay and other mock drafts, and a player I'm pretty high on that I think he would fit in Green Bay scheme pretty well is Derek Harmon from Oregon. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so Derek Harmon is a defensive tackle that I'm high on as well. He's my 3rd overall defensive tackle on my big board currently. And this is a guy that, just like Scourton, just a very nasty pass rusher, a very athletic type of pass rusher. Despite his height questions, he uses natural leverage to just drive offensive linemen backwards. Really good play recognition skills too. Really good football IQ to know where he needs to go to fill the gap, to know what move he needs to pull out of his bag to get around an offensive lineman. It has a really nasty swim and rip move that just makes offensive linemen look absolutely foolish. My concerns with him is he's still developing his tackling technique. Sometimes when he gets his hands on you, you can break away pretty easily. He also does play a little bit too high coming off the snap, so he gives up unnecessary leverage that he doesn't need to give up. But like I said, he's my 3rd overall defensive tackle and currently sits on my big board at number 35. So a little bit lower, but again, like we talked about in the kickoff of the show, this is going to be a draft where you're going to see guys like that 35th, 36th on the big board go at 23 because that's what the Packers are going to prefer. They're going to want a defensive lineman who can rush the passer, use those type of moves, and that athletic ability to get around folks.
Once again, joined by Bill Spark at Spark Scouting on X. Thanks for joining me here on the Talking Sports with Evan NFL Draft show. And what's some other defensive linemen that Packers could potentially, besides the one you mentioned and Harmon, who are some other guys that could be available in 23 that could potentially fit in your mind?
Yeah, so there's a couple other guys that they could look at 23 that one of them I'm a little bit higher on, and Alfred Collins from Texas, probably pound for pound the best run defending defensive tackle in this entire draft class. And guys of his size should not be able to move in the fashion that he does. Leaves a little bit on the table in terms of pass rush ability, still kind of developing that. But his run defense is going to keep him on the field regardless. Another guy I would look at, Kenneth Grant from Michigan. Again, 339-pound defensive tackle, should not move in the fashion that he does. Obviously playing next to Mason Graham, you look a lot. You look really good when you play next to Mason Graham, who looks really good to begin with, and it looks like a force on that Michigan defensive line. But don't sleep on Kenneth Grant. This is a guy I would argue is probably a better pass rusher than Mason Graham, whereas Graham was the better run defender. But that would be another guy. A sneaky name, if you're going to look later on in the draft, round 2, round 3 for defensive tackle, is Thor Griffith from Louisville. When you're named after the God of Thunder, you got to be able to bring the thunder in the defensive line, right? And this is a guy who, during his career, has been known to bench press 45 reps at 225 pounds. So he is strong like an ox. Very good in terms of filling gaps in the run game. Again, leaves a little bit to be desired in the pass rush department, but you can develop that. You can scheme with that, especially if your edge rushers are very good. But I think those three guys are probably guys that the Packers fans should keep their eyes on as we move through this draft cycle.
And then what more your defensive end edge players? Who are some guys there outside of, again, the player you had mentioned, I forgot, Skoriton from A&M?
Yeah, Nick Skoriton. So for the edge grouping, the Packers, obviously they're going to want to go a little bit bigger in terms of their edges, but also still keep that athletic ability. A couple guys that I like, Princely Umanmielen from Ole Miss, just a straight out-and-out beast as a pass rusher, has an NFL swim and rip move that's NFL ready and a spin move that's just puts offensive linemen in a blender. If you want to go a little bigger, Landon Jackson from Arkansas, 6'7", 280-pound sized edge rusher, just creates havoc anywhere he goes on the offensive line. A little bit stiff, but definitely a large body guy. And a guy I like a little bit later on day 2, day 3, Ahmed Hassanein from Boise State. This is a guy who had 20-plus sacks over 2 years at Boise State, so he knows how to get after the passer, knows how to create pass rush lanes for other folks as well, and a very solid run defender. So if you're going to look at edge on day 2 or day 3, Hassanein from Boise State would be my vote.
Two people I want to ask you about. One, after his combine, I have a hard time seeing him get out of the top 10, but hey, maybe teams don't go too crazy over combine numbers. But Shamir Stewart, he's a typical size edge guy the Packers like, 6'5", 67 is what ESPN has him listed as. But he didn't really produce a lot of sacks. Pressures, but no sacks. What are your thoughts on him potentially at 23?
So I'm with you. I don't think he gets out of the top 10. I mean, this is a guy who has a relative athletic score of 10, which is very rare to get, and then we had 2 guys who got it at the combine. I was there at the combine when he tested, and there was a static in the air that folks said this is a top 10 guy. But you're spot on. The question mark is, where's the production? When you have a guy who's this athletic, who's this size, who has this sort of, pass rush ability, where's the production? And it's a question mark. But if you're drafting Shamar Stewart, you're trusting your defensive line coach to say, hey, I am giving you this guy who's made out of granite and made out of clay, develop him and mold him. You look at the numbers that he put up at 6'5", 267 pounds, running a 4.59 in the 40-yard dash, vertical jump of 40 inches, broad jump of 10 feet, 11 inches. Those are some elite testing numbers that showcase explosive ability, that showcase speed, that showcase the ability to get up quick. And I'm a little bit lower on him because of that production concern. He's my edge 7 right now. But if somebody came to me and said, hey, we're going to take Shamar Stewart in the top 10, the top 15, I wouldn't bat an eye because you're betting on the trait and the development for him.
And final edge guy before we jump to corner and then we'll wrap up. Probably a little shorter than the Packers prefer out on the edge, but Mike Green for Marshall. What are your thoughts on him? I've heard rumblings about some off-field concerns from his time at Marshall in high school, but what are your thoughts on Mike Green?
Yes. So when you look at Mike Green, he's the polar opposite of Shamar Stewart in terms of production. This is a guy who led the FBS in sacks last year with 17 sacks. You say, yes, it's Marshall, so what's the level of competition like? But you see he's got a very strong core, a motor that does not quit and is just powerful and pushes people back. But he also has very good pass rush skills and ability. He has, a good chop move, good swim move, can get around offensive linemen with ease and has counter moves. Obviously, he does have some length and concerns in terms of his shorter arms, which leads me to believe there's going to be a question mark about him being able to set the edge in the run game. There are some off-the-field questions. The departure from Virginia, he kind of took it head on at the combine and said, hey, this is what it was. It was related to a sexual assault case that it didn't really go anywhere. So he took it head on, but it's still a conversation piece when you are enrolled at a school and then you just completely depart from the school with no word or no action. I know that the buzz around Indianapolis in the combine was this is a guy that's top 10 talent. but you wouldn't be shocked to see him still on the board at pick 33 because there's those concerns. So I think he's a very good pass rusher. He is my edge 4 and a first round grade for me. So right now he's currently sitting on my board as my 15th overall prospect. So if he's on the board at 23 for the Packers, even though he is a little bit smaller than what they would like, if they took him, I would have no issue with it.
And then defensive back, more so corners. I've seen Maxwell Harrison, Benjamin Morrison, Ravel, Will Johnson, Thomas from Florida State, all guys that I've seen other mock drafts that put them in Green Bay. Who are some day one corner that the Packers go that route that kind of fit what the Packers kind of look for at that spot?
Yeah, so you hit the nail on a couple of them. Ben Morrison from Notre Dame, a very good corner in terms of man coverage, zone coverage, and press ability. The big concern for him is what does his health look like? Obviously he's had a hip injury, he's had a shoulder injury, so gets banged up pretty easily. So what's that look like? Savone Revel from ECU, another long, very physical man press corner. But again, has that ACL injury, and then also, not a whole lot of production, kind of burst onto the scene earlier this year and then had the ACL injury. So you're kind of betting on trades for him. Azareye'h Thomas from Florida State, again, another very physical man, big, lengthy press corner, but again, doesn't really have the production. So whenever you see a guy that has all of these traits, right, that's very long, that's quick, that's strong, but you don't see the production, there's a little bit of alarm bell that goes off that says, okay, they have all these things, but when they get to the NFL, how do they use them? And that's going to be on your defensive back coach and your defensive coordinator to say, all right, we're going to take this guy and we're going to teach him how to use these tools. So if you're confident in your coordinators and your position coaches to do that, you can take a guy like that. If you're not confident in it, then that's a whole other conversation. But, those are probably the big ones. Obviously, you get later in the draft, you look at guys like Trey Amos from Ole Miss and Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky. The same conversation with Maxwell Hairston that we've had with some of the other guys, has an injury history. There's also some concerns around that injury history, obviously being a little bit lighter in the frame. Can he stay healthy for a full NFL season? I will say in this year's corner class, if you're in need of a boundary lengthy corner, you're going to want to get one early. Because once you hit day 3, it's a lot of positional and situational type of guys, more slot corners, smaller nickel-sized corners that you don't really want to put on the outside in a man press coverage situation. So I think ultimately that's why the Packers will probably go corner earlier than people think because of the depth of this class. But I think by the time they get to day 3, they've already selected at least one corner.
And then 2 final things I like. If the Packers shock the world, and they go wide receiver in round 1. At the 23rd pick in the NFL draft, the Green Bay Packers select wide receiver. Who do you think that would be for the Packers if they were to do that?
So there's a couple of names, obviously, at wide receiver that you could look at. If he falls, Teteroa McMillan from Arizona, there's been some rumblings that he might slide down boards. Questions about his love of the game, questions about his ability to separate, which has been my big question of him being able to separate. I saw he ran a 4.45 40-yard dash time, which is great. Still have questions about his separation ability. One guy that I really like that I'm much higher on than the field and I think would be a great fit in Green Bay is Alec Eilmanor from Stanford. 6'2", very quick, good speed, good hands, just a physical run blocker, probably the best run blocking wide receiver in this entire class. Another guy, Ty Felton from Maryland, a little bit smaller in the frame, 6'1", 185 range, but definitely a guy gets open easily, very good route runner. And then it kind of depends on if you're wanting more of a slot type of guy, a guy like Xavier Restrepo from Miami, a very shifty slot at, 5'10", 200 pounds, definitely can get open quickly. Ultimately, it would make for really great TV if for the first time in 20 years, Green Bay drafts a wide receiver when the draft is in Green Bay. But I don't see them going in round 1. I see it probably more of a round 2, round 3. which is still fine because you can get really good guys like Jack Besh from TCU and Pat Bryant from Illinois, two larger receivers that, have the ability to get open easily. In Pat Bryant's case, a very good vertical, deep threat type of receiver. And even going further down the board, guys like Trey Harris from Ole Miss and even Jalen Royals from Utah State, definitely another good wide receiver candidate in round 2 and round 3.
What are your thoughts on Jaden Higgins? He's a guy that tested really well at the combine, and he looks like he's kind of built similarly to the receiver that's going to be out first until November, and Christian Watson. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, so my thoughts on Jaden Higgins, this is a guy, he was very, very productive. And you see it on his tape. He had really good hands, excellent hands in terms of catching the pass. He also is really good. He's got this good knack of finding soft spots in zone coverage. This is a guy who's going to be Jordan Love's best friend in finding those spots in zone coverage. The problem is his production gets talked about a lot because he was so productive at Iowa State. But when you look at the route tree he ran, it was a lot of hitches, a lot of screens, a lot of go balls, easy wide receiver routes for him to get open with ease. His run blocking for a guy of his size, that large, should be a little more physical in terms of run blocking, and you just don't see it, which is somewhat disappointing for that. The biggest thing, obviously, the limited route tree that I talked about, it's going to be a question mark because obviously you have guys that, they're not quite as large, but can run a more diversified route tree. Whereas if I take a large 6'4" guy, but I got to teach him how to break in and how to break out and run curls and run screens across the field and jet sweeps and things of that nature, it's going to stunt his development a little bit, and it's going to take him a little more time to get on the field. Now, in Green Bay's case, they have guys like Christian Watson, like you talked about, Romeo Doubs, where it's not necessarily an urgent need. It's a need, and he needs to play some point during the rookie season for it to be valuable, but they can kind of take their time with bringing him along slowly. For me, I'm a little lower on him than most. I've got him as an early 4th round, early day 3 type of guy because of that route tree and because of those production questions, obviously, being in a pass-heavy offense and having those easy completions. Plus, the run blocking is a concern because if I have a wide receiver who can't run block, I got to pull him off the field on running plays. And that's going to immediately telegraph what I'm doing from an offensive standpoint.
And the Packers obviously like wide receivers that can run block really well. Well, I appreciate you coming on. We got to get going here. Appreciate you coming on, talking some NFL draft with me. It's been fun. And if you do make the trek to Green Bay, you decide to make that trek, try to connect somewhere up there.
Absolutely, yeah. If I try to make the trek up there, I'll reach out to you and we'll get together and see what we can chop it up.
But this has been Talking Sports with Evan, NFL Draft Talk. You can find all the other episodes with the other guests I've had, from Anthony Russo, Emlyn Thomas, myself, Jacob Newt Weston, and then Jacob, make sure I say his name correct, Westendorf as well. So you can find all those on YouTube. So, new episode next week. Thank you for tuning in. And again, new episode of Draft Talk next week.